This is where interesting and engaging people of Kansas come to share their stories. This week, part 2 of our discussion with a famous Wichita native son. Jim Lehrer anchored the evening news on PBS, the Newshour, for 46 years, winning acclaim for his fair and meaningful reporting. He has also presided over 12 presidential debates, earning the nickname the Dean of Moderators. On our last program, we talked to Lehrer about his growing up years in Wichita and the influences that have charted his course for success. Now we continue our discussion with Lehrer about journalism, his writing career, and why Wichita remains central to who he is. It's Jim Lehrer, part 2, starting right now, one-on-one. Well, Jim, welcome back to part 2 of One-on-One. Last week we had an intriguing conversation. So this week we're continuing with part 2 and continuation of our discussion.
Great.
And that I found to be fascinating. How would you summarize your accomplishments, your professional life?
Oh, Victor. I am, in one respect, the correct summary is that I sit before you and anybody who's watching as somebody who was fortunate enough, and the key word is fortunate enough, to be given the opportunities to do what I wanted to do the way I wanted to do it. I'm talking about professionally. For instance, Robert McNeil and I could have had a terrific relationship. We could have had a terrific idea for how to practice journalism and all of that, but somebody had to say, okay, we're going to give you a chance to do it. And every step along the way, in my case, somebody helped. Like as I said as we started this conversation, I had a guy at Victoria College in South Texas. Mm-hmm. He helped me. Every step along the way, somebody was there when I needed them to help me, there's nothing more annoying to me. My guess is that you feel the same way, Victor, to be in the company of somebody who's very fortunate and doesn't admit it or doesn't know it. I know how fortunate I have been. So that's the personal summary. And for instance, I wanted to be a writer. When I was 16 years old in Beaumont, Texas, I made the decision that I wanted to be a writer of fiction. I wanted to write novels and plays, and I wanted to be a newspaper man. The reason I wanted to be a newspaper man is because I bought into the Ernest Hemingway concept, which is you want to be a fiction writer, get a job on a newspaper. Keeps food on the table, forces you to deal with the language in an English language in a semi-coherent way, and if you pay attention, you will have, as a reporter, you'll come across very interesting people, very interesting situations you can later use as a fiction writer. So anyhow, I bought into that. So now, what I was able to accomplish, to get to your question specifically, the way I look at myself, and I'm very proud of this, but and as I say, in realizing I couldn't have never done this without all the help I've gotten, but I was able to do exactly what I set out to do when I was 16 years old.
So what is your greatest achievement?
The greatest achievement, I think, is the ability to do what I wanted to do. In other words, I was never forced. I won't say never forced. Obviously, there are always elements when but from PBS on. In other words, when we moved from Dallas to Washington, and then I started this thing with Robin McNeil. From then on, I was in charge of my own life professionally, and as I say, with that power comes responsibility, and I accepted that, and I feel good about all of that. But for instance, the fact that I've written 25 books, fiction, nonfiction, 4 or 5 plays. None of them have been what you call the kind of international bestsellers or huge successes in terms of my plays and all of that, but always satisfying to me because when you write fiction, you only write what you can write. You only write about what matters to you. And the freedom to be able to do it, and people were willing to publish what I wrote or produce what I wrote in terms of plays, I feel good about that, and I always have, and I always will. And the television thing, the NewsHour thing, the McNeil-Lehrer brand of journalism. I'm very proud of that. Of establishing, we had journalism guidelines that I created with McNeil. That they use to this day at the PBS Newshour. I said, little things like write every story with the care that you would want if the story were about you. That was one of our guidelines. Okay. And we're not in the entertainment business. That was another one of our guidelines. And all of those things I feel good about in terms of what I've accomplished, which is the people who come to work for that program now and other people in journalism. They know what the McNeil-Lehrer way of doing things is. That's a big deal to me.
Now, when you were, or before I ask that question, have you had any failures?
Oh, sure.
What are they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've always, because of my nature of having, things have gone so well for me. Particularly with our kids, Kate finally had to say, my wife Kate had to finally say, you need to start telling the kids when things don't work for you. They're going to think everything is, So anyhow, I started being a little more honest with myself and when I failed. But for instance, I had books that couldn't get published. I had plays that couldn't be produced. There were interviews. I did a lot I moderated a bunch of presidential debates, and there were always peaks and valleys in my road toward accomplishments. What I would call anybody would probably agree with me as successful accomplishments, but for every successful accomplishment, there was a little piece of a failure to get there, and sometimes I handled it well, sometimes I didn't. I hope that I tried my best just to learn from the failures, but and I really do think that I've developed finally, and it was not easy, but it developed an ability to recognize my failures and deal with it.
What about regrets?
I don't have any regrets, not a one. That's why I say I'm so fortunate. Everything, for instance, we were just saying, Kate and I have been married for 58 years. We have 3 fabulous grown-up daughters, and we have 6 grandchildren. They're all perfect, of course, as all grandchildren are. But if the personal side of my life has been a triumph, that's the way I see it, at least. And in all these other little things that I have done. I mean, for instance, even my military stuff. I had 3 years as an infantry officer in the Marine Corps as a platoon commander, and having to deal with 40 other Marines I had to worry about everything about them in very difficult, not combat, because I was between wars, which is the best place to be if you're a United States Marine. It's be between 56 and 59. The Korean War was over, Vietnam hadn't started. But anyhow, each step in my life, I felt good. I left the step and moved on, or didn't, whatever, but I always felt good about it. So I don't have any, there's no regrets. And simple answer is is simply that I don't have any.
So what I was getting at earlier is when you were, and this is unheard of, and which is remarkable, when you were retiring or planning your retirement from the NewsHour, that used to be called the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer.
Right.
You took your name off the show while you were still the host, and it became the NewsHour. Why did you do that?
Well, for reasons of transition. Television has a tendency to eat their wounded and friends indiscriminately when there's an opening. And that I knew that by the time Neil had long gone, he'd retired 15 years earlier, 16 years earlier, and it was going to be a jarring experience for a program that, because I had become, Mr. Wawa, and for our, obviously for our staff, but within public broadcasting, and some people, and all the other things, the debate moderator and all this kind of stuff. So I knew it was going to be a jarring thing, and I wanted to make that transition as smooth as possible. So the first thing I did was take my name off. And with Paula Kerger, who was then president, still is president of PBS, right. And she bought into the idea of changing the name to the PBS Newshour, and I told her exactly what I was doing. It might take 18 months for me to and so then it took not quite, I think it was about 18 months. Anyway, I then slowly I was there 5 nights a week, and then I suddenly was only there 4 nights a week for a few months, and then I was there 3, and eventually, toward the end, at the very end, I was just doing Friday nights with Shields. I'm still doing, the anchoring, but not every night. And in terms of segments of interviews and stuff, the other people, other staff members, other correspondents did the interviews, except for Shields and Brooks. And my plan was that I just wanted to kind of fade away, as Douglas MacArthur did famously after the Korean War, and so there wouldn't be a jarring thing. And my plan was that I would, maybe years from now, or weeks from now, or months from now, somebody said, "Whatever happened to that guy Lehrer used to be on?" Well, what happened to him? And of course the other thing, of course, it's happened. People say, "Oh, Jim, hey, you were terrific last night." Well, I've been off the air for years, since 2011, 2012, and in other words, it worked. It worked, and right. There was and I also prohibited and said there will be no tribute, stuff at the end when I go. There's not going to be a date. There's not going to. I refuse to say to anybody, even internally, when the date was going to come. Right. So I didn't want somebody, some surprise thing walking into the studio and blowing the bugle or something, blowing taps for my departure. I didn't want that. And it's not false modesty. I felt good about what I'd done. So I just thought it would be just the way I wanted to do it, would be, for the long haul, would be positive, and it turned out that way.
Do you miss it?
No, I think also the reason I don't miss it is because I took a long time to train. I was able, see here again, it's back to having power. I had the power to, first of all, decide when I was going, and the power to decide how I would go. And so I was in full charge. So I was not at the mercy of anything. Right. In fact, even if I changed kind of the internal schedule, talking only to Kate about it. Well, maybe I'll do this a little, because Kate was worried that I would, have withdrawal, camera withdrawal, and I got worried about it myself. But anyhow, in other words, it was flexible enough, but I had the flexibility because I was in charge of my own departure. And as a consequence, the simple answer again is no, I don't. The only time I miss it when there's a big story, but it has to be a monumental story. For me to say, oh well, I'd like to have done that interview. That would, I would love to, but I don't. It's not something I'm concerned about at all. It took a while. It took a while for me to get there.
You were called upon many times to do political debates.
Yeah.
Vice presidential and presidential debates.
Right.
What's your most pleasant memories from it all?
Pleasant memories, for the most part, were the fact that what I did mattered. I mean, I felt that first of all, the debates are part of an institution that now is permanent, and I contributed to that because when I first did the first debate in 1988, there was still some uneasiness about how to do them and all that sort of stuff. And working with the wonderful people at the debate commission, I was able to kind of be the laboratory for formats, right. For negotiation, for all the kinds of things. I was able to play my role, not in making any big decisions about it, but in implementing. I was the implementer of good ideas. Not all of them were great ideas, but for the most part, great ideas. And I feel really good about that. And I feel also the one thing I wanted to make sure of, I never wanted to be, I was held, here again, it's not false modesty, it's just the real world, the way it has to be, It is never about the moderator. If people are talking, I used to say, if people are talking about me, the moderator, after a presidential debate, instead of what the candidates said or did, that it's a failure, even if they're saying good things about it. In other words, just facilitate. I feel a moderator is not an interviewer. That's a different person.
Right.
You're a facilitator.
So at one point, the late Peter Jennings
Yep.
was on the panelist during a debate, and as you guys met to plan, and this is according to your book,
Right.
He suggested toss out the rules.
Yeah.
And let's just surprise all of the candidates. And you objected. Tell us why.
Well, it would have been immoral, unethical to do that. We gave her the part of the deal is somebody says, hey, will you moderate such and such? Will you be a panelist on this and do not on subject, but just to, when you hear the rules, will you accept the rules, will you implement these rules? And then you're suddenly going to say, no, no, that would have been showboating, and in a closed private room, I said that. And there were two other panelists there. And two print people, and they agreed with me.
And they agreed with you.
So,
Right.
and Jennings, to his credit, said, okay, all right, okay, I'm going to do that, and that's it.
So you as a result of all of the debates you did, about 12 of them, I think, you wrote a book,
Yeah.
Tension City.
Right.
I'm assuming that is in reference to Washington, D.C. So looking at all of those presidential debates that you did at those various times, describing Washington as Tension City, how would you describe Washington today?
Well, at the risk of sounding like I'm dodging your question, first of all, the Tension City is two words that came out of an interview I did with George H.W. Bush when he was a former president. I was asking him about the presidential debates for a documentary we were doing. And he said, well, I asked him about the debates, and he said, oh, well, they're Tension City. So that's where the title, it was more about the debates than it was about Washington. But to answer your question, if Tension City was used to describe Washington then, it would the words that you describe now would be Chaos City. And because things are in a state of chaos, and you don't have to point fingers of blame to just a casual observer, or just it's just a given.
And you still live in Washington, D.C.
Still live in Washington.
Yes.
Great place to live. It's Mark Shields, who my then colleague, still on the NewsHour, used to say Washington is an interesting place. That's where all the high school student body presidents end up. But I'm not a former student body, high school student body president, but interesting people, nice people, for the most part, well-motivated people, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, civil servants, whatever. They all came to do something good for their country or for their party or their whatever, their beliefs. And it's a great place to live.
Based on what you've covered throughout your lifetime, we play a little game on this program every week, and I like to do this with you. This is a picture game. You tell us the first thing that comes to mind when I show you a picture.
All right.
So here's the first one: Kennedy's assassination.
Oh, Victor, just incredible sadness, jarring sadness. The kind, for me professionally, it changed my whole attitude about the fragility. Fragility is the word that comes to mind. That any given moment, somebody can get off 3 rounds in 15 seconds and change the course of history.
Richard Nixon.
Justified.
Oh.
I mean, what he did as President of the United States justified him resigning as President of the United States. And he would have been impeached, he'd been thrown out of office if he hadn't resigned. So it's justified.
Okay. Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, nice man. I interviewed him a while, and he went to lunch at the White House when he was president, and he couldn't hear in his left ear. And I had, unfortunately, at the table, there were 3 or 4 of us, and he never turned to me because he couldn't hear me. And, but he was a very, very nice man. Whether he was a good president or not.
You were on the wrong side.
Yeah, I was on the wrong side, yeah. And I finally started going like that. Anyhow, that's...
And in Ronald Reagan's words, tear down this wall. Fall of the Iron Curtain.
That is a huge, when I think of that, I just think history. This was a huge event in America, in world history. When it was the end of the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
This ended 40 years. You talk about tension city, that was a tension world.
Right.
And this was the first sign of that tension in the world. We're not going to go to nuclear war. The walls come down. The two are connected.
9/11.
Oh, God. Tragedy beyond anything that I could have ever imagined. You always think as a fiction writer, too. You think, oh, my God, what could I have ever... Nobody would ever have published a book about something like 9/11 beforehand. It would be it's not plausible.
Next one is the Clintons.
Oh, it's a personal thing. I did the first interview with Clinton after that story broke about Monica Lewinsky. And it was a memorable thing for me, just as one professional in the business of interviewing people. And I had to ask the President of the United States, Mr. President, paper, the Washington Post says this morning that you had an improper sexual relationship with an intern. Is that true, sir? And that's the first time the question was asked. Was in just in the office next to his office for the NewsHour. It was taped, but anyhow, that's what I think of. This man, what I think of grace and dignity. Whatever anybody thinks about his politics, he's a man of grace and dignity.
And the last one?
The question about Chaos City. He's the main main chef. It's mixing a couple of analogies, but he's the main chef of that chaos.
Is there any such thing as fake news?
Oh, not the way he uses the term. It's a pejorative term. It's his way. It's a political. He's in a different. He's created his own vocabulary, and people are trying to adjust to it, and they're not doing very well. And I think it hasn't lasted. There's still a lot of faith in the news business was not strong to begin with. He's lessened it because the people who support Trump, they support his attitude toward the press. They feel they have to, and that fake news thing is just it's a pejorative, nasty way to undermine an institution on which our democracy depends, which is a free press.
So what are your thoughts on the present state of American journalism?
Well, it's in a state of revolution right now, and revolutions are not pleasant, particularly for the people in the middle of them. Just ask Muammar Gaddafi and people like that. Revolution's hell if you're in the middle of it. And the problem is for journalism is adjusting to this incredible good thing, which is the digital revolution, the coming of and the expansion of cable television, news, all that sort of stuff. At the same time, trying to maintain standards, old-fashioned standards, where the resources to do quality journalism have diminished. So a lot of newspapers have closed, a lot of television stations have given up doing solid local news reporting about city councils and school boards and things like that as they used to do. And so journalism is trying to figure out what its new role is and how to execute it and to get the resources to do it. One of the beauties about public broadcasting is that those resources are probably more available now, comparatively speaking, in the public sector than they are in the private sector. And a lot of the solid news reporting is going to be done probably in the future with nonprofit foundations and people funded at least by those.
Describe for us a typical day in the life of Jim Lehrer today.
Today?
The retiree, yes.
Well, it's a very pleasant life. After having been very busy every day, either in personal life or in professional life or my writing life, all of these things, I now have the option, and I've accepted it. Not only have I accepted it, I've finally gotten used to it in a way that's very, very positive. There's space now between what I do. Mm-hmm. I still do a lot, but I don't do anything near as much as I used to do. But when I do something, there's time before and afterward to get ready for it, make sure that I want it. And I also am very, very selective about what I do and what I don't do. What energy, because obviously as older I've gotten, the energy seeps out a little bit. So what energy I have, I want to use it on ways that matter to me. Spending more time with our kids and our grandkids and stuff like that, with our friends. Friendships need to be maintained, and you need to work at it. And I've spent more time doing that than I used to, and it's all pleasurable.
Is there anything that you want to accomplish or do that you haven't yet done?
No. That may be the shortest answer I gave you in this whole conversation. No. I'm not. I don't have anything on the list anymore.
Nothing on the bucket list.
Nothing on the bucket list. And I hadn't realized that until you just now asked me the question. Because that's the first time in my life when I haven't had things that boom, 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 and I'm very comfortable about it.
So by which philosophy of life do you live by now?
Take it easy and do the things you want to do.
Wow, that's very interesting. What goes through your mind each time you come back to Wichita?
Well, the main thing is a cliche, but it's the truth. I always say, hey, I'm home again. This is where my life started, in the delivery room at Wesley Hospital. Now, I don't remember that specific event,
right.
but I feel that this is it. This is where it all started for me. Mm-hmm. And my relationships with my mother and my father and my brother, all of them started there. So the things that whatever I've done since, I had to have a beginning. Wichita was the beginning. And every time I come back, I want to kind of say, hey, thank you. Not just to Wichita as a place, but to Wichita as a people, and a kind of an attitude. And say the schools were terrific. The public schools in Wichita, Kansas were fabulous in the 1940s. And there were good people who taught there, good people who went there, and that's what I think about.
Well, on that note, Jim, Lehrer, thank you so much for joining me one-on-one.
Thank you, Victor.
And thank you for all your contributions to public television.
Thank you, Victor. Thank you.
And thank you for watching this edition of One-on-One. Please send your questions or comments to oneonone@kpts.org. I'm Victor Hogstrom. See you next time.